The New York Mets won their fifth straight game, and Brandon Sproat shined in the futures game. On today's show, I'll talk about the Mets' victory and if Sproat can be a secret weapon for this team down the stretch.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans. You're watching Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on X at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing at justbaseball.com, where I work as the managing editor, where I'm going to write a piece tonight off of today's show talking specifically about Brandon Sproat and if he could be a secret weapon coming out of the bullpen for the Mets down the stretch here. We'll talk about that in the final two segments today. First things first, let's discuss the Mets' fifth straight victory. They've now won another series, beating the Colorado Rockies in each of the first two games. They've moved a little bit closer to the Atlanta Braves as the Braves lost to the Padres on Saturday. So now the Mets are only 3 games back from the Braves. They're a half a game back from the Cardinals, who beat the Cubs on Saturday. The Diamondbacks beat the Blue Jays, so the Diamondbacks are a game back from the Mets, as are the Padres. It's starting to feel like those 5 teams are going to be the contenders this year in this wild card race, although we can't count out any of the other ones just yet until we see what everyone does at the trade deadline. But really good win for the Mets, and particularly coming from their bullpen, because Christian Scott did not give the Mets a great start on Saturday. He was spotted 4 runs in the second inning. The Mets, they got some help too from the Rockies. Pete Alonso leadoff single. DJ Stewart draws a walk. Mark Vientos lines out. Ben Gamel draws a walk to load the bases. Then Luis Torrens hits a double play ball, but Brendan Rodgers boots it. Then he throws it wide of Ezekiel Tovar. That allows 2 runs to score and extends the inning. Then Jeff McNeil hits a double to really make the Rockies pay, score 2 more. All of a sudden, the Mets have a 4-0 lead. But Christian Scott gave up a run very quickly after that, a leadoff home run to Jake Cave. He settled in a little bit. Overall, it wasn't a horrible start, but what we saw from Christian Scott today is he just did not have his best stuff. He was too frequently leaving pitches over the heart of the plate a little bit too much. He got caught with a hanging slider against Charlie Blackmon, who hit a 2-run homer later in his outing. There were some big moments. He struck out Jake Cave after the home run in a spot where there's a couple batters on. But overall, you look at the day for Christian Scott. He goes 4 1/3. He allows 7 hits, 3 runs on the 2 home runs, which continues to be his Achilles heel this year. We've seen it in his big league stint. We've seen it throughout his minor league tenure in AAA. He's just given up a lot of long balls, and it's one of 2 things. It's either hanging breaking pitches, hanging sliders, or sweepers, or it's fastballs that just get too much plate. And those are things that can get cleaned up over time. I will talk about Scott a little bit more in the final segment as it relates to Brandon Sproat. Could Sproat replace Scott in the rotation? Why do I believe that Christian Scott should get some more runway here? We'll go through all that a little bit later. But the stars of the game were Dedniel, Nunez, and Jose Butto. First, it was Butto, who came out of the bullpen to bail Christian Scott out in the 5th inning, where there was a couple runners on. He had given up that home run to Charlie Blackmon in that inning. Then after the home run, he gave up a double and a walk. That's when Mendoza had seen enough. There was only 1 out. Butto comes on with a couple runners on, and he gets a double play ball. It was a 3-6-1. So Butto had to hustle over and cover first, got the out, and yelled about it. He was fired up, as he should be. Goes back out for the 6th inning in a 1-run game, strikes out the side, goes back out again in a 1-run game in the 7th inning, has a 1-2-3 inning, and has 2 strikeouts. So across his first 2 2/3, he had 5 strikeouts and a double play ball. It's really impressive stuff in the double play ball, stranding some inherited runners. So outstanding stuff from Butto. They tried to get a little bit more out of him. This is obviously the last time he's going to pitch before the All-Star break. I did not mind the move at all by Carlos Mendoza, trying to see if he could squeeze one more out of Butto, potentially save Edwin Diaz for the day. You never know what could happen. You might have been able to save Dedniel Nunez, but when Butto went back out there for the 8th inning, he gave up a single, then he walked a batter. Carlos Mendoza pulled him from that point on, and Dedniel Nunez came in, and what did Nunez do? Exactly what Butto did for Christian Scott. He bailed him out, promptly gets a double play ball, then he gets a pop out, gets out of that inning. Really great work from Nunez. Bottom of the eighth, Francisco Lindor hits a 3-run homer to give the Mets some breathing room, really to save Edwin Diaz for the day. Same sort of thing here. Dedniel Nunez was not going to pitch again after going up, a day before the break here. I don't think they would have had him available for the final game of this series. So it made sense to pitch him again in the ninth inning, avoid having to use Edwin. And Nunez struck out the side in that ninth inning. So huge performance by Butto and Nunez. You can make an argument best bullpen performance of the year from the Mets from these two guys. They got 14 of the 27 outs. They each got a double play ball to strain inherited traffic, and they struck out 8 combined. So of the 14 outs they got, 12 of them came via strikeouts, and those huge double play balls that they got, just dominant stuff. I tweeted this after he got through that 7th inning. It was something along the lines of Jose Butto probably deserves to start. I mean, you can make a case that Jose Butto should be in this rotation over Christian Scott. Absolutely. His 7 starts were better than Christian Scott's 8, and he's been lights out coming out of the bullpen. But I said he has become indispensable for this Mets bullpen. They need him. He has been so good coming out of the pen, and he's getting critical outs. And I also later tweeted out, I'd prefer to see Jose Butto right now at the state of this bullpen getting, 2 appearances across one turn through a 6-man rotation. So when Senga comes back and he's going to throw a rehab game on Sunday on 4 days rest to allow him to get a rehab appearance in a live game instead of a sim game. So we'll talk about that on tomorrow's show. But once you go to a 6-man rotation, which could be on the other side of this All-Star break, instead of having Butto take Christian Scott's spot in the rotation, I'd prefer to have him pitch 2 times over a 6-game span in critical junctures where the game is on the line like it was today, because he has just been that good. I said there's a verb for what he's doing right now, where you are just too valuable to be pulled from the bullpen, even though you deserve to start. We call it getting Lugo'd. And I don't think that the Mets will hold Butto in a bullpen spot for the rest of his career if he just continues this throughout the rest of this season. Although it's always going to be in the back of your mind, he could be really good out of the pen. But I actually think next year we're going to see Jose Butto in the rotation. If you just think about the possibilities with Butto, with David Peterson still being around, Sean Manaea, Kodai Senga, Christian Scott, Brandon Sproat, next year's rotation looks pretty good. But bottom line from this game, Jose Butto and Dedniel Nunez were the MVPs to really carry the Mets and get a victory against a team that obviously they should beat, but the things weren't necessarily lining up with the way Christian Scott pitched to be able to get through this game, to be in a position where the bullpen was going to have to cover that much time or that many outs with the way this bullpen has been. That's not a recipe for success for this team, and those 2 guys really turned the game on its head. So great stuff from them. And speaking of some great pitching, we got to watch Brandon Sproat in the Futures game. I want to talk about his performance and why I believe he can be a weapon for the Mets down the stretch. We'll talk about it in just a minute. First, though, a word from our sponsors. This episode of Locked On Mets is brought to you by Booking.com. Booking.yeah. With summer travel heating up, especially travel for baseball games, it's time to explore those U.S. cities you've always secretly wanted to learn more about. Yes, we're talking about your rivals' cities. With hotels, bed and breakfasts, vacation rentals, resorts, and so much more on Booking.com, you might just find your perfect stay, even in your baseball rival city. The Mets are going to be playing in Miami after the All-Star break, a 4-game set that begins next Friday. If you want to come in, you can watch some really good Mets baseball, and Booking.com will be the place to go to find a great stay. The right stay can make you a fan of any U.S. city, even your rivals. So book today on Booking.com on the site or in the Booking.com app. If you're an everyday listener to the show, make sure you become a Locked On Mets insider. This is our texting service where you get updates from me anytime some news breaks on the Mets. You can ask me questions anytime. We can go back and forth through text. You also get these starting lineups sent to your phone each day in a graphic, so you never have to go on social media to find out who's in the Mets starting lineup. If you want to be a Locked On Mets insider, find the link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. Now, for those of you who aren't aware, the Futures game is a showcase that Major League Baseball has every year to kick off All-Star Weekend, showing the best prospects in baseball. It's an annual tradition, and this year, Brandon Sproat represented the Mets. He was their one player that was in the game. Now, he pitched in the 3rd inning, and he squared off against Mariners shortstop Cole Young, who's in Double A, to get like a 750 OPS in Double A. Now, Cole Young bats left-handed, and Sproat fell behind 3-1. He then throws a fastball on the black at 98.6 miles per hour, gets a called strike. Okay, so now he's back in the count. It's the full count. He throws a sinker, which was probably a two-seam. It's registered as a sinker if you look at the box score or at MLB.com's box score, but probably a two-seamer. Outside black, 99.2 miles per hour. That pitch is fouled off. Okay, so he went inside, got a called strike, went outside, got a foul ball. He then goes back inside on Young and throws another fastball at 99 miles per hour. This one about 6 inches inside, not on the black, moving a little bit closer, knowing he's going to get a swing and trying to get a strikeout. Young gets a piece of it, but by getting a piece of it, he gets jammed to hell and his bat gets sawed off literally in half. It was incredible how you blew up that bat. Gets a pop out. That's the first out of the inning. Next batter he faces is a righty. He throws 2 sliders in the other batter's box, gets swings, so he's ahead 0-2. He then tries to throw a front door slider, so he tries to freeze him and get a pitch on the inside corner. Instead, it's just 2 inside, not a strike. He then goes back to the fastball on the black, 99.2 miles per hour. It's hit to the shortstop. Shortstop makes an error on the play. No sweat for Brandon Sproat. Next guy he faces is Samuel Basallo, who is the top catching prospect for the Orioles, one of the top catching prospects in all of baseball. I think at Just Baseball, we have him in the top 20, I think. Very high on Basallo. And first pitch, hard fastball, down and away, gets a double play ball. I think he was out of the inning in 11 pitches. Just dominant stuff and sort of showed you what he could look like as a relief pitcher. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. But first, I want to focus on the arsenal. Because Brandon Sproat has 2 really good pitches. And he's got 5 pitches, but he's got 2 plus pitches potentially here. His fastball is legit. Okay, he throws gas. On the year, he's averaging 96.2 miles per hour on his fastball. Over his last 5 starts, he's averaging 96.7 miles per hour. Now, I got a lot of data on his pitch mix from Just Baseball, from Aaron Layton. So I was able to get some stuff that you're not going to find on MILB.com. This was some sort of insider stuff that you're only going to find if someone has access to the information. So I was lucky enough to get it. And the thing that jumps out with Brandon Sproat is how much he can just pound the zone with his fastball and get strikes. So on the season, his in-zone percentage on the fastball, so how often that fastball is in the strike zone, 62.1% of the time. In-zone whiff percentage on his fastball, so when it's in the zone and guys swing at it, in-zone whiff of 25.6%. That's really good. About a quarter of the time on fastballs in the zone, they're not able to put any bat on ball. Chase rate for the year, 24.3%. BABIP, so a batting average on balls put in play, is 204 on his fastball. The hard hit rate is a little bit high on his fastball, but most of the time it's on the ground. Now, over his last 5 starts, there's been an uptick in velocity there, so 96.7 miles per hour. Now, here's the crazy part. He's gone from landing that fastball for a strike at a 70.6% clip across the whole season. And this is obviously taking into account the last 5 starts as well, but it's jumped. So you got to imagine that his strikes percentage was probably below 70%, and these last 5 starts have pushed it over. His strike percentage on his fastball over his last 5 starts, 76.3%. So 3 out of every 4 fastballs are landing for a strike, whether that means it's in the zone and it's called a strike, it's fouled off, or guys chasing outside of the zone. And speaking of that, he has a chase rate lately even better than for his season at 27.7% on his fastball. In-zone whiff still good, 21.1%. In-zone percentage has gone from 62.1% on the year, which again includes these 5 starts. In these last 5 starts, his in-zone percentage is 68.6%. So he's nearly landing that fastball in the zone close to 70% of the time, getting a strike on it 76% of the time, getting swing and miss in the zone and out of the zone on the pitch. And the batting average on balls put in play against his fastball over his last 5 starts is 179. Now, the only pitches he's given up for a home run this year, it's the fastball and his curveball. But his home run percentage overall is 4.2%. That's not that bad at all. And what he can pair his fastball with in particular is a disgusting changeup. For those of you who know Paul Skeens and have seen him pitch, which we all did just recently, there's been a lot made about his splinter. That's splitter and a sinker combination because he throws it so hard. That split change, whatever you want to call it. Splinker for Skeens. Aram Layton, who again covers prospects better than anyone at Just Baseball for us. He dives into film like nobody I know. And he has been raving about this changeup, and he said it's the closest thing he has seen to Paul Skeen's splinker. That is how good Brandon Sproat's changeup is. You look at what he's done with that pitch this year. He is landing it for a strike 56.8% of the time, but it's only in the zone 36.2% of the time. Okay, so that's showing you the great chase that he's got on the pitch. Hard hit rate 37.5%, ground ball rate 68% on his changeup. Ball's only put in play at 12.6% of the time, most of the time on the ground. Lately, his strike percentage has gone up slightly on that changeup. His in-zone whiff percentage is up to 39.1% on his changeup over his last 5 starts. So now he's able to throw it in the zone for a strike. So it can be called the strike, but if guys try to swing at it, almost 40% of the time they're swinging through it, and they're chasing it 31% of the time. On this season, it's fastball 51% of the time, changeup 18% of the time, cutter 16%, and then he's got a slider and a curve. Over his last 5 starts, the arsenal has changed a little bit. He's upped the changeup usage. He's taken the fastball usage down a little bit, but it's marginal. 49% fastballs, 21% changeup. So those 2 pitches have been 70% of his arsenal over his last 5 starts where he's gotten great results. Meanwhile, he's got a slider and a cutter, 11% each, curveball, 8%. And I will note that there's really 2 fastballs. There's a 4-seam that he can throw up in the zone and a 2-seam, more of a sinker, that he can throw down in the zone, get ground balls. Changeup comes in at 89.5, fastball. I mean, it could touch 99, and he gets it over 100 with regularity still, but averages 97 basically over his last 5 starts, 96 on the season. Bottom line, with those 2 pitches and being able to throw a slider to change it up in the other batter's box, like we saw today, maybe get a chase. I don't know if a big league hitter is chasing that, but a bad hitter on the team might chase that, and he can still throw that slider and hopefully, backdoor it on some lefties, steal some strikes. Same thing with his curveball. Those are the nuances that I think he'll still have to work on, similar to what we're seeing with Christian Scott right now. But you could see a Devin Williams style reliever, although I think he'd throw the fastball more than Williams. Williams throws his changeup like almost 60% of the time, fastball mostly the rest of the time. But you could see that type of a mix of just fastball changeup primarily as a reliever this year, and he could get a lot of outs. On the season, batters are hitting 168 against him. They're slugging 280, 534 OPS. BABIP, which is batting average on balls put in play, again, across all of his pitches at 222, ground ball rate 52.1%. On the season, he has a 1.71 ERA across high A and double A. That's in 73 and 2/3 innings pitched, 85 strikeouts, a whip under 1. That's walks and hits over innings pitched. So if you're allowing less than a base runner per inning, you're doing something right. He walked 16 batters in high A. He's only walked 12 in double A in about double the amount of innings, which is really impressive that he's really honed it on the strike zone. Since May 21st, across 7 starts, he has gone at least 6 innings in 6 of those starts. He's gone 7 3 times. In 4 of those starts, he has at least 8 strikeouts. Brandon Sproat might be a better pitching prospect than Christian Scott. I wouldn't say that just yet because we're watching Christian Scott struggle in the big leagues. That's a tough jump. I don't think that Brandon Sproat's going to enter a big league rotation right now and have more success than Christian Scott. I don't believe that. Long term, though, he might have better stuff because he throws harder and he's got a pitch in the changeup that will be a weapon against both righties and lefties. Christian Scott has incredible stuff against righties. Lefties can get to him a little bit. 2 home runs he gave up today. Lefties. So I can see Sproat being able to thrive in a way that I can't see Christian Scott thriving out of the bullpen. So I want to talk about those 2 guys in the final segment here. Also, Sproat was asked today about potentially pitching out of the bullpen. So I want to go through that. Could Brandon Sproat come up and be the answer for the Mets bullpen as a lockdown reliever? We'll talk about that next. First, though, a word from our sponsors. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. I love sports. I love them so much. I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs have now winded down in the NBA and the NHL, we just get fewer games. And the sports aren't sportsing like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. because all I have to do is open up the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. If you want to stay up to date with all the latest in the world of sports, make sure you check out Locked On Sports Today, streaming 24/7 on YouTube. Now, Brandon Sproat was asked directly today about coming up and being a relief pitcher for the Mets down the stretch. Here's what he said, quote, "Whatever chance I can get to the big leagues as quick as possible, whether that's starting or relieving, I'm definitely not going to complain about it." He says, "I'd figure out a way." Now, that's obvious, okay? As much as guys want to start, if you're telling them that they can pitch in the big leagues tomorrow as a reliever instead of staying as a starter in AA or AAA, the answer is always going to be a resounding yes. Everybody wants to be in the big leagues, okay? So he's not going to have a problem if they decide to go this route. No, I understand if you just watch Christian Scott have admittedly more of a clunker of a start and has yet to win a game this year and think, is Christian Scott the best answer for the Mets rotation? Now, I have been as staunch of a Christian Scott supporter as you're going to find. Of course, I'm not going to talk down on the guy after one bad start where he still had some strikeouts, made some big pitches, didn't have his best stuff, and was starting on 4 days rest in a consecutive start for the first time in his entire career. He has now made 3 starts on 4 days rest, 1 before he got promoted the first time, and 2 his last 2 turns through this rotation as the Mets wanted to stick with the 5-man to get to the All-Star break. So I personally believe, even though he's got a 4.36 ERA, I think there's more there with Christian Scott. We've seen him pitch deep into games in a way that other starters for the Mets didn't earlier in the season. So he still has shown that ability to keep his pitch count low and work deep into a game. Not to say Brandon Sproat can't do that, but I'd rather take the guy for August and September who already has 8 big league starts under his belt, who's started to take his lumps and can keep developing off of that, then take the guy straight from AA and slide him into the rotation, especially when I think there's more upside for him this year in particular, pitching out of the bullpen. With Christian Scott, the way I look at the rest of his season here, he now gets a much needed rest for the All-Star break, and he's not going to be the first pitcher going when you come out of the break. He's probably going to be 4th or 5th in line. And then you have Kodai Senga, who again could be back on the other side of the break. I think they might want to squeeze one more start out of him. So I did the math on this before. He's going to start now on Sunday, which means they could actually even move him up, pitch him on 6 days rest. Let's see, the minor league season would resume the same thing as the big league season. So he could pitch on Saturday the 20th, turn right back around, pitch on the 26th against the Atlanta Braves, where the Mets can line things up where he would slide into the rotation before Christian Scott, give Christian Scott his extra day. Everybody else you potentially could just have start their first time out on 4 days rest, or excuse me, their second turn out of the break might be on 4 days rest. But there's a way that you can basically have your 6-man rotation that we've been talking about with Severino, Scott, Senga, Manaea, Quintana, Peterson, good to go throughout the rest of July, all the way through August. And here's the thing. The Mets are going to play coming out of the break 24 consecutive games. That'll take them to the middle of August. That's without a day off. That's 4 turns through the rotation for Christian Scott. Now, if those 4 turns don't go well, yes, you can option him to AAA. And from that point on, final 7 weeks of the season, the Mets are going to have off days in 5 of those 7 weeks. Now, also, you can have him make 2 more turns in the rotation probably before the deadline. If you have enough relievers in this bullpen that you want to go to an 8-man pen, you can then option Scott if he still hasn't pitched well in his next 2 starts. Go to a 5-man rotation with a bullpen day, essentially, whenever you need to give Senga that extra day, assuming he's going to need it, which he probably will. So the Mets can navigate this thing where, assuming health, they can roll with the 6 starters that we're talking about here, whether it's in a 6-man or if Scott gets pulled from it, a 5-man rotation where guys like Butto and Hauser can potentially cover you in bullpen games when necessary down the stretch where you have a 5-man rotation. So That's what I look at moving forward, and I don't see a reason why the Mets should force Brandon Sproat into a big league rotation. That's a big jump. Now, pitching as a reliever, that's a different story. It's 1 inning. His stuff's going to play up. So instead of seeing him average his fastball at 97, all of a sudden he might average 98, 99 on a fastball for all we know. Okay. He's got the changeup. He could pitch off of those 2 pitches primarily with the occasional slider, curveball, cutter to steal some strikes, to keep hitters off balance. I talked about this on a previous show. I did a podcast, 2 prospects who could help the Mets down the stretch. I talked about Sproat and I talked about Acuna. And both of them not being starters. I talked about Acuna in sort of an ancillary bench role potentially. Maybe he does start some. But with Sproat as a reliever, in that podcast, I talked about this. Corbin Burns did this for the Brewers back in 2018. The Brewers, led by David Stearns, went to Game 7 of the NLCS before they lost to the Dodgers. Corbin Burns was a consensus top 100 prospect heading into that season. He was further along in his development. In 2017, I think it was like 140 innings. I can't remember if that was split between high A and double A, but he had thrown a lot of innings. Started off 2018 as a starter, but they converted him. He made 6 relief appearances in AAA and got himself ready. He gets called up, did not allow a run in his first 6 big league appearances, had some difficulty in August, pitched to a 4.70 ERA. Then he settled in, had a 1.93 ERA in September across 12 appearances. Then in the playoffs that year, he made 6 appearances, did not allow a run in 5 of those 6 appearances, was great coming out of the bullpen. I could see a very similar thing with Brandon Sproat. Why trade an arm and a leg to get Chad Green, although I actually really like Chad Green, but just for the purpose of this exercise? Let's say you're calling the Blue Jays at the deadline and they're not budging. They want Blade Tidwell for Chad Green, or they want Ronnie Mauricio or Brett Beatty for Chad Green. I'm not trading a guy that could be a starter for, 5 years, 6 years on my team for a reliever for a year and a half. Not doing it. Now, if you can get a trade done with the Blue Jays by giving up some guys that are further down your system, maybe they like an 18-year-old that you have, and you can deal someone that's not going to hurt as much, or maybe you can make a trade for Mike Vassell, a guy that is depth right now, probably still a top 20 prospect in the system for sure, but not a guy that you're going to regret because he's going to be an ace for the Blue Jays, right? If you can swing that deal for Chad Green or any other reliever, by all means, you make those trades. But if you know in your back pocket, if you're David Stearns, you have a kid who can throw 100 miles per hour with a disgusting changeup and some other good pitches as well to complement that arsenal, that you could slide into a bullpen like you have in the past in your career and potentially get a standout performance, and you continue to sort of build internally where you have Edwin Diaz, Dedniel Nunez, Jose Butto, Brandon Sproat, while still having Phil Maton, maybe Adam Ottavino, and you spackle it together. I think that the Mets might decide to go that route. And the funny thing about it, not the funny thing, but you don't have to do one or the other. You can do both. You can add some arms at the deadline. Absolutely. But arms that you are okay with the price to acquire them, right? So Andrew Chafin might be out there. We're going to talk about this upcoming week, 5 teams that the Mets could target for relief help. So I'm going to go through a lot of options, but the Tigers are one of them, and I'm going to talk about Jason Foley on that show. But Andrew Chafin is another piece that has this year in a club options, very similar to Phil Maton. The Mets, by just absorbing that contract, maybe even taking Mark Canha back because he's not playing well. The Tigers don't seem to be going anywhere. He's making a lot of money. They can absorb dollars and potentially send very minimal back to get a left-handed reliever to replace Jake Diekman. So they can make moves like that, knowing that they have Sproat in their back pocket. They might be able to get a Jason Foley or a Chad Green or some of these other better relievers we're going to talk about this week. And that's fine and well, but you always still have that same card in your back pocket. So if you don't need Brandon Sproat, let him keep developing. It's going to be good for your rotation next year. Maybe call him up to AAA, let him get some starts there. By all means, you don't absolutely need him if your bullpen's not an issue. But if your bullpen continues to be an issue, Brandon Sproat is absolutely a card the Mets could call on, and one that I would love to see because I think he'd have the chance to really blow people away, give you that incredible first audition in the big leagues as a relief pitcher. And then next year in camp, he could be fighting for a starter spot on the opening day roster. I think that's the ideal outcome. I honestly do. And I'd prefer, honestly, for the Mets to use Sproat instead of giving up a prospect that's going to hurt for a reliever at the deadline. If they can get trades done with Mike Vasil and Kevin Parada and some of these other prospects that I'm not the biggest fan of, yeah, I'm going to love that. But I'd hate to see even someone who's got his value down like Brett Beatty traded for a relief pitcher, especially one without control. So we'll be discussing all of these things throughout this week. It's going to be a big trade deadline week as there's no games to discuss. First things first, there's a final game here before the All-Star break that I will be talking about tomorrow's show. German Marquez makes his long-awaited return off of Tommy John. So it'll be interesting to see how he pitches. Cal Quantrill could piggyback him. He was going to get the start. The Mets will have Jose Quintana going, who's been great lately. We'll see how they end up faring in that game, if they can finish the job and advance to 5 games over 500 heading into the break. But that'll all be discussed on tomorrow's show. I appreciate all of you who tuned in today. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. If you are watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. Our new goal is to get to 10,000 subs by the end of the year. So I appreciate all of you who continue to subscribe. If you want to be Locked On Mets Insider, find a link in the episode description. Go to subtext.com/LockedOnMets. If you want to follow me on social, you can do so at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen or your first watch every day. Now for your second watch, head over to YouTube and check out Locked On Sports Today, which is streaming 24/7, covering everything in the world of sports with our local experts on each team and our league-wide experts on each league. You find Locked On Sports Today streaming 24/7 on YouTube and Amazon Fire TV.